ready to watch your favorite horror movie downstairs if you want to come join us.
Halloween? Yeah, I'll be down there in a minute.
Wait, what?
I'll be down there in a minute. What's going on, everybody, and welcome at last to my review of John Carpenter's The Thing. If you're just now finding my channel or found me recently, I was going through John Carpenter's filmography back in like August, September. Took a little bit of time off because I was traveling for Fantastic Fest, and of course October was just balls to the wall, and now we are finally back on track. And you know, I've been doing YouTube for just over 6 years, and I have never once been intimidated to review a film. Until now. John Carpenter's The Thing is my favorite horror film of all time. It has been for quite a while. This, like many movies that I talk about with a lot of admiration, is something that my dad introduced me to when I was very young. And I actually remember, believe it or not, the Laserdisc was something that I used to wear out quite a bit. I don't remember if we had this on VHS, but we had the Laserdisc of The Thing. And it's one of those movies that I remember when I first watched it. Sometimes you have those movie experiences to where you're walking in blind, you don't know what to expect, and you get to this scene and you think, oh my God, that is insane. That is the best part of this movie. That's what I'm going to remember this movie for. And I had that experience about 7 or 8 times throughout the runtime of this movie. Like when the dog exploded, I'm like, oh, so that's what I'm gonna remember this for. And then you get to the spider monster that goes to the top, and then you get to the Blair monster and the blood test scene. There were so many iconic moments in The Thing that it's one of those movies that no matter how many times I've seen it, no matter how many times I discuss it, no matter how many times I've heard other people discuss it, the impact and just the timeless masterpiece that this movie is never ever dilutes. And it's also one of those movies that every single time that I watch it, I kind of approach it with a different lens. Sometimes I approach it for nostalgia, sometimes I approach it for comfort, sometimes I approach it just for interest and admiration as a movie fan, and how did they do this, how did they put this thing together. And this most recent time when I watched it, I actually tried to put myself in the shoes of somebody that did not know what this movie was, that maybe walked into it blind and didn't know the original story, didn't know the movie back from the 50s, and just sat down for this horror experience in 1982 not knowing what the hell they were in store for. And when you watch the movie through that lens, it's amazing to think about what that person's experience must have been like, to where you're introduced to this Antarctic depot, you get introduced to all these different characters. Right off the bat, this helicopter is chasing down this dog, you don't know why, and this dog is just kind of creeping around this little depot the entire first, 10 minutes of this film. And when you get to that scene where Richard Mazur's character Clark puts that wolf dog in with the rest of the dogs, and he just creeps in and lays down and sits still, and you slowly start to hear those monstrous sounds, and all the other dogs start to freak out, and then the dog's face just opens up and the skull pops out, and like from that moment on, you got to think about what somebody in 1982 is thinking of, like, holy shit, how did they do that, and what the hell am I in store for? And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the things that The Thing has in store for you. And going along with all of that, it's amazing to think that this movie was actually a box office bomb and a critical flop when it came out. All of the major respected critics of the time called it a barf bag movie and said it was just gross and nasty.
I would call this the barf bag movie of July. And the movie just basically is an excuse for this very gruesome and repellent creature to gross us out. It is the most nauseating thing I've ever seen on a movie screen, I think.
That's quite a statement.
You had E.T. that was released a couple of months previous that year, and so everybody was just admiring this family-friendly, proven masterpiece of E.T., and then you had a couple weeks later just the opposite side of the coin of this alien movie where people are getting dismembered and dogs are getting killed and there's heads getting torn off and turned into spiders. And apparently the movie-going audience just wasn't ready to let go of that heartwarming side of E.T. Phone Home in order for to enjoy what The Thing had. There's even other factors like the AIDS epidemic that came out in the early 80s, and everybody was just up in arms with fear and paranoia about that. There was very little information available back then, so nobody knew what AIDS was, how you catch AIDS, how you can contract it. Nobody could tell who had AIDS, and so that whole undercurrent of The Thing, of paranoia and this parasitic monster that's taking over people, and you don't know if the person you're sitting in a room with is the thing and it's going to give it to you, like that whole undercurrent also probably affected the movie a bit, similar to how if we had movies that were focused on COVID anywhere in the past 2 years, a lot of us probably wouldn't be in the mood for that story. And so the film that many of us would call John Carpenter's masterpiece almost actually ended his career. It was to the point where he had to take on Christine, which is one of my favorites, just to pay the bills. He had no interest in it. It wasn't a movie that he came up with the story himself. It wasn't something that was his own like gestating idea or a passion that he wanted to get out on film. He took it just to get a paycheck because The Thing almost destroyed his career. Retroactively, you look back, that's just an amazing thing, that a movie that so many people would call one of, if not the greatest horror film of all time, absolutely failed on release. But luckily, the mastermind that is John Carpenter was able to bounce back and continue on working and give us so many other awesome movies within the horror and the sci-fi genre throughout the rest of his career. And The Thing, luckily, has gained its audience. It has gained the respect that it always deserved. And maybe it was a little bit ahead of its time, but eventually society caught up with it, and we have one of the most celebrated horror masterpieces of all time. And with that being said, let me start going over the laundry list of positives with this movie and what all makes it my favorite horror film of all time. And the main thing that I always go back to this movie for, because it seems like the filmmaking industry has kind of left this behind at this point, is that this movie quite literally is the Bible for me on special effects, on practical effects, on creature design, on blood and gore, and how to convey all of that through the camera without needing a bunch of digital or optical effects, without having to shade things and a bunch of computer-generated imagery. I mean, you had the prequel, The Thing, that came out in 2011 that absolutely went the opposite direction of what this movie tries to teach horror filmmakers and special effects artists. And so when you look at the work that was done with all of the different creature designs, with all of the gore effects, with the kills, with all these insane sequences throughout this entire film, to this day, it has not been matched. To this day, it has not been surpassed. 14,779 days since this movie was released in theaters in 1982, and we still have not had a movie come close to what they were able to achieve. Rob Bottin was only in his early 20s when he started working on this film. He had worked with Carpenter before in The Fog, and of course he had done The Howling at that point, which is known as being one of the best werewolf transformations alongside American Werewolf in London to this day. And when they were in pre-production for The Thing, when they were just kind of figuring out the script and trying to get the cast together, John Carpenter got back with Rob Bottin, wanted to work with him again, and he was so young and just hungry and ambitious to make some of the most insane creature designs and creature effects that he could come up with in his head. John Carpenter had his doubts and sent him to go and work with the storyboard artist that was already working on The Thing. And so Rob Bottin and the storyboard artist went, and all of these different ideas that he had and these different pieces of the script, these different sections of the story, and brought to life these images of what was in Rob Bottin's head. And so he came back to John Carpenter with this stack of storyboard images, and everybody but Rob Bottin had doubts that they were going to be able to do this, even to the point where the first few effects that they had in the film, the first few actual models that they had in the film, nobody really thought that it looked all that great. In person, it had a totally different look than once they lit it, once they shot it from certain angles, and when it was actually in camera. And so all of these different iconic sequences that you have in this film, from the dog opening up and the different pieces of the Thing alien coming out, and the tentacles and the spider legs, and the body chest cavity opening up and biting the guy's arms off, and the head stretching off and turning into a spider, all of that was stuff that was created through the creativity of Rob Bottin and wanting to create this alien creature that wasn't just this hulking Frankenstein monster that they saw in the 1950s film, but was actually more in line with what the original story Who Goes There had, which is this imitator, this copier, this alien creature that can make itself look like everything else. And so all these different sequences, you're seeing this creative creature design come into life, but there's also these little subtle things in there, like in the dog, where it's not just a dog coming out of this monster, it's all of these other creatures throughout however many different galaxies and planets that it has copied in its lifetime. And so all these different things are coming out at once.
Damn it, child, torch it!
And to this day, Rob Bottin is not a household name. That is not a name that you will hear very many, even film fanatics, say a whole lot. Rick Baker is pretty much the only special effects artist that I ever hear everybody just know the name and recognize the name. But this is a guy that did all of this amazing work in The Thing that so many people would view as among the best special effects work that has ever been created in the history of film. Went on to do pretty much all of the iconic craziness with Paul Verhoeven with Total Recall and RoboCop. Also went on to work with David Fincher in Seven and in Fight Club. So this is a guy that I still would maintain is one of the more underappreciated persons that has ever worked in Hollywood and has brought some of the most iconic shit to life that all of us know and love. And so for all the amazing things that this movie does that I'm going to continue to get into, the special effects, the creature designs, all of those iconic images in this movie, that's what sticks with you. That's what made the insane impact, almost in a negative way, in 1982. And that is what has come full circle and made this gigantic impact in horror fandom ever since. Now, outside of all of the special effects work, one of the things that I admire the most about The Thing is the way that it explores paranoia and fear and people reacting from that, both on a story front as well as a character front. Now, this is a very old school bottle film to where you have this vast openness of Antarctica where it feels like you should be able to escape any evil that might come to you in this little depot here. But because of the storm, because of that vast openness that is just barren, they're actually isolated by the openness, which is something that is so ironic and contradictory on a visual front that I've always appreciated that aspect so much. But you have these people that are set in this situation to where their humanity is tested. And through that, you have this ensemble cast, all cast wonderfully, all acted wonderfully. And it's one of those movies where you don't really get to know a ton about all of these individual characters. There's about 10 or 12 different people you follow in this movie to where Kurt Russell is obviously the lead. The second most fleshed out character I would say is Childs, played by Keith David. Everybody else has smaller, a little bit less significant roles within the film, but I have never once watched this movie and felt like I didn't know enough about any one individual character. You have all of these people, and both with the little bit of information that the movie gives you in its opening act, as well as how it decides to flesh them out when the fear and the paranoia sets in, that you always feel like you know just enough about all of them. You see who they are within the group, you see their role and their job within this group, but you also see how that person actually is when the true person comes out, when their fear and their paranoia is tested. That always makes these characters feel like wholly realized people.
I know you gentlemen have been through a lot. And when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch!
I mean, you've got Windows that we're introduced to, and he's almost like the Bill Paxton and Aliens character. Like, hey, game over, man. We can't get anybody on the radio. And he still has a bit of that kind of whiny cowardice to him throughout the movie, but he seems to have a little bit more of a realistic approach than some of them, to where he's more afraid of this situation and the implications of what the fear and the paranoia is doing to everybody else, that he remains one of the more human characters throughout the film. You have Clark, played by Richard Mazer, who is somebody that identifies with and kind of bonds with the dogs and the wolves that they have in this compound more than he does all of the other human characters. He always has this kind of standoffish nature to him. He always feels isolated. He feels kind of like this rebel amongst the group, to where you never really see any other characters interact with him in a warm way. There's no friendships, there's no real relationship that is shown on screen outside of the love that he has for these dogs. And when the situation kicks into high gear, it's the death of these dogs, it's the danger and the impending doom of these dogs that takes the forefront of his attention, to where once he starts to doubt the potential humanity of all of his other fellow characters, he's the first person to pick up a knife and try to stab Kurt Russell in the throat. And even the way that they use Clark to be somewhat of a red herring throughout the middle act of the film, to where he's the one that was spending the most time with the dogs. He's the first person that Blair kind of verbally accuses in a subtle way, to where he asks him, how long were you alone with that dog? And it's because of his standoff nature, it's because of the way that he is isolated from the rest of the group and doesn't really have any friendship vibes going on with anybody, that they really do make you believe that he might be the thing throughout most of this film, all the way up to the blood test sequence. And even the way that they kind of realize the character of MacReady, who is the top billing star at this point with Kurt Russell. He was the guy that had worked with John Carpenter twice before this point. He was the main character of the movie that was, brought to be a little bit more significant character in the writing once Kurt Russell agreed to be that character. But he's not the typical leading man. He's not like the leader of the group. He's not the guy with the gun. He's not the guy with the badge. He's not this ultimate badass that everybody looks to. He's just the helicopter pilot. He's one of the lower rung dudes in this entire group, but it's through the way that he kind of experiences and how he reacts to this situation that he rises up to be the leader of this group and rises up to be the person that seems to be the most level-headed and seems to be the most smart at approaching this situation, to where he doesn't really feel like the main character of the movie until the third act.
Yeah, fuck you too!
The character of Blair, who from the beginning of the film is the one who is the smartest. He's the one who's the most aware. He's the one who is the most kind of darkly realistic about the situation, to where he is doing this autopsy, figures out what this being is, what this parasitic alien actually is, figures out what exactly its motivation is, and then isolated from everybody else comes to the conclusion that this thing has already copied somebody. Somebody among us is the thing. And honestly, if it would have been a situation to where everybody had listened to Blair, the movie would have been about 15 minutes long. But unfortunately, his mania in his clarity isolates him from the rest of the group, and as the movie goes on, you start to realize, along with the other characters, that Blair was actually right. But when they finally realize that he was right, it's too fucking late for Blair. When you have a movie that presents a situation and a scenario like this, where there is this paranoia, where there is this fear, and they want you as the audience member to put yourself in the shoes of all the characters and start to make all of these inferences throughout the film, start to, sentence somebody to death essentially in your head, to where you're certain that that character is the thing, or you're suspicious as that character might be the thing, and you're experiencing this scenario along with this ensemble cast. You have to have well fleshed out characters that you understand, that you know, and that you care about for that to work. And so it's always been pretty amazing for me that you can watch a movie like this that has so many characters, so many things that they have to introduce, as well as this wild concept. And like most of John Carpenter's best films, he is so efficient in the storytelling and in his direction at getting all of that done. And as far as building tension, building scares, and executing scares, I think this is one of those few movies out there from decades past that is still timeless with the approach that it takes, to where there are so many things that it tries to come across as far as building up tension, as far as psyching out the audience, as far as misdirecting the audience, especially through the red herring of Clark, through the unsure nature of what the hell is going on with this dog in the first 15-20 minutes of the movie, throughout not really understanding or comprehending to a full degree what the thing is capable of until you are shown multiple times throughout the movie.
Clear!
Clear.
And also kind of going along the ride with the characters of how the hell do we tell who is the thing? Is there actually a test? Is there a way for us to know who the thing is before the thing emerges? And none of that is embodied more than in the scene of the blood test. And I would still say that the blood test, along with like the decapitation scene in Exorcist 3, is an argument for greatest jump scare of all time. And it's because of the way that John Carpenter sets it up and builds it up and then finally executes it in a way that the audience is not expecting, that this maintains one of the best done jump scares, because nowadays jump scares are done just quantity over quality. It's just how many times can we do a loud noise and startle the audience? How many times can we have a loud boom and trick you into thinking that that's actually you being scared when it's really you being startled. And this is one of those iconic moments throughout horror history to where they do not take that bullshit lazy approach. And John Carpenter builds up throughout the second act of the film all the different characters trying to come up with all these different ways to figure out who the thing is. You have the whole blood serum test that's an absolute wash because somebody gets rid of all the blood. There is all these accusations made to where they think that this character is the thing, and then they think that MacReady's the thing, and then they think that Clark is the thing, and then you finally get to this sequence to where you are going to find out. We are going to find out who the thing is. And so you have MacReady, who is almost just executed by everybody, who is now in control, paired up with Windows, who is the one person that he has at least seemingly proven to be human, and everybody else is tied down. And every other character in the room, as well as you, the audience member, as this sequence goes on, has less and less faith in the validity of this test that Kurt Russell is doing, where he gets this needle red hot and puts it into this little dish holding blood samples of every single character. And in his mind, every single piece of the thing is its own individual being. And so if you try to strike it with a hot needle, even just blood tissue should try to have some kind of a reaction to survive. And so you have one by one by one, all these different characters that are proven to be human, and there's nothing happening. You have Childs that's calling bullshit. You have Kurt Russell in his face starting to kind of doubt it as he puts the needle and realizes that Clark, the person that he just shot in the head, is seemingly human. Or is he? Is this test even valid? And then you get to this moment to where he's holding the blood dish of Palmer. And they cut back to Palmer, and his face is so non-worried, so nonchalant. He just kind of just has this, whatever, let's get this over face that puts you as the audience member at ease, thinking, oh, he can't be the thing. He's not worried about it. And then Gary starts to kind of protest his disbelief in the test, saying it's a crock of shit. And the camera stays on Kurt Russell as he's holding this dish and tells Gary about, yeah, I thought you would feel that way. You are the only person that could have got to that blood, so you'll go last. And in the middle of talking, hits it with that needle. And just the initial startle that you get as an audience member from that visual and from that noise is enough. But then it's immediately followed up with one of the most insane sequences in the movie, to where all the characters are strapped into this couch and roped into this couch, inches away from the dude is starting to convulse and turn into this monster that has just been proven to be the thing. And that entire sequence, man, like I say that the special effects is like the Bible of practical effects work. That sequence is the Bible for how to do a true effective jump scare right. And the way that John Carpenter decides to bring the underlying themes of paranoia and uncertainty and disbelief and distrust to its ultimate fruition by the final moments of this movie, by leaving the ending dark, ambiguous, and uncertain in and of itself, is just the perfect way to end off this movie. Now, I'm somebody who likes happy endings, but I also love when there's a very unhappy ending, when it serves the story. And this is one of those times where no other ending would have served the purpose of the story of this film better than what they did, where you have the two surviving characters, one of which we have been with this entire third act, saw everything that he just did and triumphed over. The other one is another character that by the end I would say we trust the most, which is Childs, but his absence throughout the final 10 minutes of the film causes this disbelief and this distrust not only in MacReady but you as an audience member, to where they come face to face at the end when the Blair monster has been vanquished, the thing has seemingly been vanquished, and neither one of them are really in any shape to do anything to each other. And so the movie just leaves you off with this quiet conversation between these two characters.
What do we do?
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
And the movie just fades out. It's brilliant. It's perfect. It's an absolute masterpiece in storytelling, in building fear and paranoia, and building tension from start all the way to the point where the credits roll. And it's all because of the way that from the beginning of the movie all the way through the end, John Carpenter had this tight grip on how he was going to tell this story and how he was going to convey these themes to the audience and how he was going to bring it to that ultimate fruition with that dark ending. And to this day, you still have very heated, passionate debates amongst the Thing fans about who is the Thing at the end. Is it MacReady? Is it Childs? Is it both of them? Is it neither of them? And there is legit arguments that people have had for decades about which one is which, about which is true, what is the true answer. There's these theories out there about the breath and the way that they're, showing characters throughout the film not have that condensation, and those characters are clearly the Thing. There is theories out there about like the way that the light is hitting characters' eyes will show you who is the Thing and who is not. There's this theory that the JB bottle, the Jim Beam that MacReady gives to Childs to drink was actually full of gasoline, and that was like his final test. There is theories that they're both human, and it's just about the paranoia. Even after the monster is vanquished, the paranoia still lives on, which is kind of the way that I choose to view the ending. I mean, it's just one of those things like The Shining, to where there's never really a correct answer, there's never really a wrong answer, but it's so much fun to discuss, even 40 plus years later. It's also worth noting that this is one of the extreme few films that John Carpenter made that he did not choose to compose himself, that he did not write and compose the score. This one's actually scored by Ennio Morricone, who is famous more for westerns, and so this score in this movie is very different than his usual flavor of score. And at the same time, it's also a little bit different than what you typically expect from Carpenter, because Carpenter was always big on synth sounds and electronic sounds, especially in the 80s. And this one leans a little bit more out of that, and it couldn't be more perfect. It's one of those things to where Carpenter has always been such a master when he writes, directs, and composes a film, because he kind of just controls everything, how the story's going to go, how you're going to experience the story, and how the music is going to reinforce the story. And this is one of those few times in his career to where he kind of lent that out to somebody else, and it actually was a masterful collaboration. It's one of the more simplistic scores out there in the horror fandom. It's one of the more simplistic scores out there as far as iconic movies of the 80s. The 80s tended to be very big in excess and, was very loud and very in your face in a lot of ways with some of the things that they were trying to convey. And this one's very subtle. It's very slow. It's very minimalist. It's boom, 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 boom. It's just tones. And as minimalistic as it is, it always helps to build that paranoia and to build that tension throughout the movie, because it lets the story and what's going on a visual front take the center stage, when the score is just kind of like propping that up a little bit and aiding in some of the dead spots. Whereas a score that typically would be kind of the star of the show in a Carpenter film. Masterpiece is not a word that I throw out lightly. It's not a word that I throw out very often, but it is one that absolutely merits the use of that word when talking about John Carpenter's The Thing. Timeless is another word that I very rarely throw out, because there's very few things in this world that are timeless. As much as we love some of the things of the past, whether it be music or movies or video games or books or whatever, there is always an element of aging that is going to affect those things that we love. There's things that's going to fall out of relevance. There's things that's going to inevitably look worse than what it did back when we initially saw it. There's impact that's going to be diluted a little bit. And this is one of those rare things that when I watch this film, when I look at the characters, when I look at the script, whenever I look at the score, or listen to the score rather, when I see the special effects on screen, when I look at everything in John Carpenter's The Thing, there's nothing about this movie that I look at and say, yeah, that's not going to play as well in 2022. Yeah, that's not as good as the things that we have nowadays. Yeah, I've seen this done better since. There's none of that. This is one of those movies that absolutely 100% is a timeless masterpiece. And so with all that being said, guys, if I haven't hammered home the point enough, this is my favorite horror film of all time. It's one of my favorite films of all time. I think it's one of those movies that should be put underneath like bulletproof glass and preserved throughout the entirety of however long humanity goes, and marveled at for all the things that it was able to accomplish. People might not have been ready for it in 1982, but as Marty McFly has said,
I can't guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. But your kids are gonna love it.
and I am one of those kids. I adore this movie. I marvel at this thing. It's one of my most treasured pieces of art that has ever existed, and I think that as time goes on, there's going to be way more people that have the response to it that I did than people that don't. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for the playlist of all the rest of my John Carpenter reviews. And I'm also going to put up here a playlist of my 2022 new release reviews. If you want to see some more modern films of me talking about them, please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this John Carpenter review series now that we have gotten over the hump that is The Thing. And as always, guys, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.